All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. Abhishek, Ankit, Manu, Rahul. Um,
No,
hey, we're ready to get started. Um, yeah, I think so. We've managed to cover a lot of topics. We are now in the last few sessions. So we've got modifiers, which we're going to try to do today. We've also got tenses, we've got idioms, and we've got pronouns, and a small discussion on comparisons. So those are what's left, right? So what I decided is that I'll try to keep today's session a little lighter than normal. So instead of packing everything about modifiers into one discussion, I thought maybe let's just split it up a little bit so that it's a little easier to digest. And yeah, that's what we're going to focus on today. So we're going to focus on making sure that the most important parts of modifiers we cover that today. And because I think we're moving at a pretty fast pace, it's okay to push it back by, let's say, maybe a couple of modifiers we can push back a little bit. But by the end of the session, I will take a quick. I will check with you guys as well. So whether you'd want to proceed with that today itself, or maybe just push it to next week. All right. So that said, let's get going. We've got modifiers, and modifiers is an important topic, right? So there are two reasons that modifiers is important for us. The first one is, of course, modifiers is a topic, as in it is something that is tested on the GMAT. The second reason is that modifiers can be used to sort of hide your, let's say, other topics. So think of it this way: modifiers can be used to pad your sentence. So the core of your sentence might be relatively simple, relatively easy to understand. But by adding modifiers into the sentence, what you do is you increase the complexity of the sentence. So that can sometimes make it harder to spot other errors. And that is why modifiers are important for us. So, I mean, that's another reason that modifiers are important for us. Now, what are modifiers? Modifiers are adjectives and adverbs. That's it. Exactly two things. So the entire set of modifiers consists of adjectives and adverbs, and all adjectives and adverbs are modifiers. That's relatively easy to understand, but just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, let's just quickly review what adjectives and adverbs are. Adjectives are things or elements within a sentence that describe nouns. They typically tell us how many nouns, which noun, what kind of noun we're looking at. Adverbs, on the other hand, are elements that describe anything other than a noun. So that could include adjectives, other adverbs, verbs, and even entire clauses. So if you're modifying an entire clause, it has to be an an adverb that does that, not an adjective. Now, adverbs are slightly harder to identify than adjectives, but what kind of information do they give us? Typically tell us why, when, where, how often, right? And to what extent. That's the kind of information that adverbs typically provide us. Now, in the course of our sessions, we've obviously seen many cases in which we've looked at single word adjectives and adverbs, right? So anytime you say cold or rainy, right, you're using adjectives. So single word adjectives. So this is not something that we have to spend too much additional time on. I think everyone is already familiar with this. What we're going to spend time on today is other structures that perform the function of modifiers. That is, they perform the functions of, they are adjectives and adverbs, but they're not single word adjectives and adverbs. Slightly more complicated structures, but they end up performing the same types of roles. So let's get started. The first one is possessive nouns. Now, when you think about pronouns, right? You have subject pronouns and you have object pronouns. For example, if we're talking about Nelson Mandela, so if you want to refer to him without using his name again, it would depend on which position in the sentence you're looking at. So, for example, if you say Mandela won the Nobel Prize, right? So over here, instead of Mandela, you can say he won the Nobel Prize. So earlier Mandela was the subject, and now he is the subject, right? If you say the Nobel Prize was given to Mandela, you can say it was given to him. So him is the object form of the pronoun. Now, some people believe that if your noun, right, like over here, I've used Mandela in the normal form. Some people believe that if you use the noun in the possessive form, right, Mandela's apostrophe S, so they think that once you do this, you are now not allowed to use these two forms. So if you take a look at this sentence, Nelson Mandela's imprisonment made him a national hero. So over here, what's happening? The noun is in the possessive form. It is not directly Nelson Mandela, it is Nelson Mandela's imprisonment. So we've got an apostrophe S on Nelson Mandela. So that makes it possessive. We're saying something belonging to him or something related to him. Made him. And now you see him over there, it's an object pronoun. So some people think that this is impossible, that it can't be done. Now, this is one of those rules that the GMAT has never explicitly, stated. So we need to be careful about this. So what a lot of people did in the past is they just said, "Hey, I've never seen this rule broken on the GMAT, so let's just assume that it's a rule." And then they said, this is an absolute rule. But then there are questions in which this so-called rule has been broken in the non-underlined part, so more recent questions. So my advice to you is don't look at this as an absolute rule. So as it is in our classes, we generally don't look at, just each and everything as an absolute. We are very careful about what we call an absolute. That's my advice to you here as well. So that sentence that you see, right? I don't want you to look at that as a level 1 error. It's a level 3 error at best. So in case you're going to apply this, please remember, don't apply it as an absolute, apply it as a preference. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? Any doubts? All right. I've got 3 confirmations, 4 confirmations. Excellent. All right. Now the next one is prepositional phrases. Now, prepositional phrases can be a lot of things, but for all practical purposes, right? Like in 99.9% of the cases, prepositional phrases are going to be modifiers. So, I mean, it's possible to use a prepositional phrase as the subject of a sentence, but it's not very common. So, okay, let's get back on track. Practically speaking, if you see a prepositional phrase, it's most likely going to be a modifier. Now, firstly, let's quickly revise what is a prepositional phrase. A prepositional phrase is a preposition plus a noun or the thing we discussed, a gerund. So let's put that down. Preposition plus noun slash gerund. The combination of the preposition plus noun, right? So this combination of these two things is called a prepositional phrase. This entire prepositional phrase is what we are discussing will be a modifier. So yeah, we've got a couple of no, hang on. First, take a look at the first example. She solved a question. Now, I've highlighted the prepositional phrase. Sorry, not highlighted, underlined it. I've put an underline below the prepositional phrase. So the prepositional phrase is on the board. She solved the question on the board. Now, when you're ready, oh, hold on. So I was going to ask you to tell me what type of modifier this could be. But first, let me just quickly ask you, when you're ready, just unmute yourself and let me know what is the meaning of this sentence.
Hello.
Yeah, good, go ahead.
Yeah, she solved the question on the board. So where did she solve the question? It is on the board. So
Okay.
it is an adverbial modifier.
Okay. So good. That's one answer. And Manu is saying ambiguous. Fair enough. So Ankit, would you agree that, yeah, I can say she solved the question on the board. So where did she solve the question? She solved the question on the board. But is it also possible that I'm saying the question on the board, right? That there is a question on the board and she solved that question,
Yeah. That's possible.
right? So in this case, it is ambiguous that on the board could be an adjective or it could be an adverb. We may be, okay, look, it might be like she's a student, the teacher has put a question on the board and she is solving that question in her notebook. So there is a question on the board and she's solving it in her notebook. Or she could be going up to the board and solving the question on the board. So it's ambiguous, but the point is we've identified the prepositional phrase and we've seen that it's acting as a modifier. Now, that is okay. I mean, that's not of particular importance for us on the GMAT. What is particularly important is this next one. This structure, preposition plus gerund, right? Now, what is a gerund? It's an ing that functions as a noun. Now, when you see a preposition plus gerund, that is implying that someone is doing something, right? Someone is actually performing an action, then after the comma, so if you start with this preposition plus ing, after the comma, you need the subject of the clause to be shared with this prepositional phrase. Now, the way I've put it sounds very complicated, but the application is absolutely straightforward. So let me just quickly erase this. Yeah. Now I'd like you guys to move to that CEO example. Take a look at the first one. In firing all her employees. So what do you see? You see preposition plus gerund. It's implying that someone is, and remember, gerund is just the ing form. So if you see preposition plus ing and it's implying that someone is doing something, then after the comma, the subject, remember, the subject of the clause needs to make sense with the prepositional phrase. So in firing all the employees, who did, and the application is very straightforward, as I said, who did the firing? The CEO did the firing. So the CEO needs to be the subject. If you take a look at the second sentence, in firing all the employees, a mistake was made by the CEO. The mistake is not what fired the employees. The CEO is the one who fired the employees. So the second one is going to be wrong, even if it sounds okay. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? All right. I've received confirmations from everyone. Excellent. Now let's move to infinitives. Now, infinitives are, let's say, capable of acting as nouns as well. So they don't have to be modifiers. Okay, let me put it this way. Prepositional phrases are almost always modifiers, right? But infinitives may or may not be modifiers. That is, they are more commonly used as nouns than prepositional phrases. So the point is that they may be acting as modifiers. The simplest way to see this is to just take examples. So please take a look at the first sentence. The first man. Take a look. I have placed an underline below the infinitive phrase. Check. Are you comfortable saying that this is an adjective? If you are, feel free to unmute and tell me why we say that it's an adjective.
Because it describes the first man. No.
Right. So it's effectively telling us that this was the first man, like first in the sense to walk on the moon, right? Perfect. Now, the second one, she worked hard to get a promotion. take a look at this. How or why are we saying that this is an adverb?
Because it describes why she worked hard.
Excellent. So she worked hard to get a promotion. Why did she work hard? She worked hard to get a promotion. So this is telling us something about the reason behind her action.
Hello.
Yeah, Kit.
Sir, I have one question regarding the prepositional phrase. Sir,
Yeah, please go ahead.
you said the preposition plus gerund should make sense with the coming clause with the subject, right? So with is a preposition, so it applies to with also, because in a lot of questions in on the GMAT we have seen that with works as an adjective and the adverbial modifier.
So what's most likely going to happen is that it doesn't. But let me ask you whether the example that's coming to your mind actually fits the pattern that we're discussing. So, this is a slightly, let's say, contentious discussion, right? When we discuss it, we probably will not get into the complexities of it, right? But the short answer to your question is when you see with, the way
Hmm.
you are probably thinking about, right? In
Hmm.
our classes, we'll say that that is actually functioning kind of like an absolute phrase. You've come across absolute phrases before, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So in our classes, we'll say that that with is sort of kind of functioning as an absolute phrase. Now, that contentious part that I said, right, the slightly debatable part is some people say that, yeah, that's like another way to create an absolute phrase. Whereas other people say, no, no, that's not an absolute phrase. It's a prepositional phrase, but like a different type of prepositional phrase, right? But the point is, in our classes, we'll treat it as an absolute phrase just for the sake of convenience. Now, very quickly, let's understand why that doesn't actually fit this particular pattern. So, let me give you an example of what you are probably thinking of. For example, if I'm saying, with his exam just around the corner, he decided to stop. Uh, he decided to stop sleeping late. Take a second, check. Does this match the kind of pattern you're thinking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So this is slightly different. It is okay. So I don't care whether you call it an absolute phrase or a prepositional phrase, but the point is this is with plus noun plus modifier.
Hmm.
Right? So we are looking at a slightly different situation where we just have directly preposition followed by an ing. That is a gerund.
Right.
Right? So what you're asking absolutely is an important structure, but it doesn't follow the same rules that we are discussing here. So we'll discuss this under a different category.
Okay.
Okay,
So,
awesome.
uh, so
Mhm.
that means with cannot be followed by a gerund, or the structure we have to consider is with is more sort of the absolute with plus noun plus modifier, which is modifying a noun.
So yeah, this was my best guess as to what you might be thinking about, given our experience with earlier GMAT questions. Um, so, for example, if you say something like, "With firing all our employees, the CEO made a mistake," probably not going to be the right structure, right? With plus gerund on its own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So important structure, absolute phrases are very important, and in fact, and that's why I thought maybe if we do absolute phrases today, it'll be too much. That's why you'll
Mm.
find that in this session there is no discussion on absolute phrases. So we just thought we'd get the foundations down.
Okay, sir.
Of course, the other thing is that we seem to be actually moving very fast. But anyway, that we'll come to that later. All right, guys. Now let's move to relative clauses. Now, we've discussed relative clauses before. We've looked at relative clauses. We've said, okay, look, if you got these relative pronouns like who, that, which, and they're referring to some noun before them, that's a relative clause, right? So, what does a relative clause do? A relative clause describes some noun before it. Mm, this means that all relative clauses are adjectives. Of course, I mean, with a slight, just uh, I just want to quickly introduce the point again that in our classes, we don't treat a relative clause referring to a clause as an absolute error. So you may remember that we had an example where we took a clause. So let me just write that out. We took a clause and then we put a comma which, and we said, hey, don't be completely close to the idea of using a which to refer to a clause, right? So this is not something we would want to do. It's not exactly something we'll absolutely, feel is the right way to express the idea. But we don't want to treat this as 100% error as well. So you may remember this discussion, which is okay. But just to set it aside for now, a relative pronoun referring to a noun before it introduces a relative clause that is basically going to describe the noun before it. I think I'm possibly unnecessarily explaining this. You might already remember this. Quick check. Does everyone remember this? Relative clauses? Just give me a yes or a no. All right. Rahul, not sure? You can unmute.
Yes, sir. Not sure.
Fair enough.
I'll,
So, yeah, go ahead.
so I'll revisit the class if there's anything I've missed out.
No, we can just take a quick 10 seconds on this. And of course, you can review the classes later on as well. If I say a man who reads newspapers every day, right?
Yes.
Now you see this part, who?
Mm-hmm.
Now this who is called a relative pronoun,
Yes.
right? That term is not important. The point is it introduces something called a relative clause, this who reads newspapers. And this entire structure, right, these three words, who reads newspapers, it describes the noun before it,
Yes.
the man. So it helps us understand which man we're talking about, right?
Yes.
That's what we mean by a relative clause. A relative clause describes some noun before it. That's exactly what we're looking at over here.
Okay.
Awesome. Now, the rules around relative clauses, you can get restrictive modifiers, you can get non-restrictive modifiers. Restrictive, so some of you may have studied this as essential modifiers and non-essential for non-restrictive. Again, the terms don't matter. What we need to do is we need to just understand what they mean. So let's take a look at the first example. Let me put it in a little box. Yeah. Take a second, read this sentence. When you're ready, please explain what this sentence means to me.
Who are cute is telling about the characters.
But what else? So when we say
It's
that it is telling
restrictive.
us, yeah, so just to very quickly clarify, when we say it's telling us something about the characters, right? That just means it's giving us information about the characters. So that is what we expect a relative clause to do, right? That's pretty much the job of a relative clause. So now let's come to the second thing that you said, that it's restrictive. What does that mean? How does that impact the interpretation that we have over here?
So it is telling about the particular characters, not
Very
all the
good.
characters.
Excellent. So the word we want to use is particular characters or specific characters. Another way to think about this is we are creating a subset from a larger set. So imagine that there is a larger set of characters, like a big set of characters, and we are saying little children like a subset of these characters, the cute characters. So you can remember it as a subset, or you can remember it as Abhishek said, which is particular characters. So specific characters, cute ones, not all characters, but specific ones. Okay. Now, when you're ready, tell me why the second version of this is wrong. Little children show a preference for characters, comma, who are cute.
So it tells us that all the characters are cute.
Right, good. And it also tells us that children show a preference for all characters. Now, if children like all characters, what is the point of using the word preference? Right? Why do we want to say that they show a preference for characters? Like all characters. How do you have a preference for all characters, right? It doesn't make any sense. And as Abhishek also pointed out, it means that all characters are cute. This is unlikely to be the right meaning. So we take a meaning call and we say that this version of the sentence is incorrect. Now, let's put everything together. You've got relative clauses, which we've already studied in detail. Then you've got the concept of restrictive clauses and non-restrictive, or essential and non-essential. Now, how do you identify an essential? It doesn't have a comma between the noun and the relative clause. How do you identify when it is non-essential? You will see a comma between the noun and the relative clause. So if you do, then you're probably looking at a meaning call. You need to decide whether that information is, oh yeah, this is something I should have discussed with you before. When we say essential and non-essential, we don't mean that this information is important or not important. Remember that this is very important. When we say a modifier is non-essential, it does not mean that the information in that modifier is not important. Essential, non-essential has nothing to do with the importance of that information. Instead, essential and non-essential just means that this thing is essential or not essential to helping you understand which noun you're talking about. So when you say that, oh, this is an essential relative clause, what you mean is this information identifies the particular noun that you're talking about. When you say that this is non-essential information, what you mean is this information is not needed to identify the noun. That is it. So remember, essential, non-essential, not related to the importance of the information. It's just related to whether that information is required to identify that noun or not. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? Excellent. Ankit, please go ahead.
Uh, so that non-essential that example which is on the screen that the little children show a preference for characters, comma, who are cute.
Hmm.
I didn't actually get it that how is it referring to all the characters, because who are cute then refers to what?
It refers to the characters only. So let's take a step back. Essential, non-essential, right? It does not change the basic character of a relative clause. What does a relative clause do? It always describes some noun before it,
Hmm.
right? So that will never change. Whether you have a relative restrictive or a relative non-restrictive, the fact that your relative will describe a noun before it, that will not change. Agreed?
Okay.
So your relative will continue to refer to some noun before it. The difference is that if it is a restrictive relative, then it'll
Hmm.
define that noun. it'll specify which noun. And if it is non restrictive, it'll just give you some general information about that noun, but not identifying information.
Okay, 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 I got it.
Let me give you another example. I think maybe we can come up with a better example over here. Give me a second. Yeah. Now, you have a sentence in front of you. The sentence is grammatically correct. Mm, I'd like you to check whether the meaning is correct. I mean, is this something that we should mark? And of course, by you, I mean the entire class, not just Ankit. Okay, I see an answer coming from Abhishek. Abhishek, would you like to walk us through your reasoning?
So in this sentence,
Hmm.
who study from OZs, it describes the uh, it describes people, all the people.
That is
So
right.
the sentence tells us that all the people take the GMAT.
Yes. So the sentence tells us that all people study from the OGs and all people take the GMAT. So let's go through this step by step. We have a relative clause in front of us who study from, okay, I should have written who study from the OGs. Who study from the OGs, right? We have a relative clause who study from the OGs. And we see that there is a comma between the noun that the relative clause is referring to and the relative pronoun. So they are separated by a comma. When this happens, we are looking at a non essential modifier. What does non essential modifier do? It basically gives us additional general information about the entire set. So it does not create a subset, it just gives us general information about the whole set. Now, the whole set over here is all people. So that is why people say that, you can remove the part in between commas. You can remove the part in between commas because the meaning of the sentence is people take the GMAT. It is not that, okay, let me put another version of the sentence without the comma. People who study from OGs take the GMAT. And now that I think about it, I could have made this sentence better by saying people who take the GMAT study from OGs. That would have made a little more sense. But anyway, the concept is the same. So take a look at the second sentence. Again, you have a relative clause, but the difference now is this relative clause is defining the noun before it. It is pulling a subset out of the larger set. So the way it is meant to be read is those people who study from OGs, those particular people, not all of them, just those people who study from OGs take the GMAT. So even though both of these sentences are grammatically correct, it is actually the second one that is correct from a meaning perspective. Mm, Ankit, quick check. Comfortable?
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
Excellent. Manu and Rahul also, let me know. Awesome. All right. Now, one last thing before we move on. Sometimes you may see a comma. We've discussed this slightly before, but during our session on punctuation. But let's discuss it again now because it's relevant. Imagine I say something like this. Mm, let's think of something. Uh, a car, comma, a Ferrari, comma, that crashed into the wall during the race. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't put a full stop. This is not a complete sentence. Yeah, a car, a Ferrari that crashed into the wall. Now, quick check. Has anybody here heard that that should be for restrictive and which should be for non-restrictive? Okay, now let's take a quick, hang on, let's see this. A car that crashed, right? Without the Ferrari bit. A car that crashed versus a car which crashed. Okay, Abhishek is saying he's come across this somewhere. Let me just ask you guys, tell me which one sounds better, the first one or the second one? Okay, Manu's going for the first one. Abhishek, everyone's going for the first one, right? So this is a rule that many people know, even if they don't like think they know it. So the point is that if you want to use something, a relative clause, to define the noun before it, and you have to choose between that and which, right? You will almost certainly use a that for a restrictive one. Anyway, all this restrictive stuff can get very, let's say, confusing. All we're saying is just check, do you have a comma or do you not have a comma? If you don't have a comma, you are most likely going for a that, not a which, right? So if you don't have a comma, you most likely need a that, not a which. If you have a comma, then you certainly need a which. That is, you cannot use a that. So let me be very clear. If you don't have a comma, you most likely need a that. You probably don't want to go for a which. But the second one is dead certain. If you need a comma over there, you cannot use a that. It has to be a which. So this is how you decide between that and which. You ask yourself, hey, am I restrictive or non-restrictive in meaning over here? The other way of thinking about it is, hey, do I have a comma here or do I not want a comma over here? Right? It's one and the same thing. So restrictive is just like a shortcut to remembering what you're talking about. Otherwise, you'll always keep thinking in terms of commas and non-commas. I mean, the absence of a comma. So that's how you decide between that and which. Now, coming back to a Ferrari example, the one at the bottom. Over here, I just told you that if you want a comma, you can never use a that, right? But over here, you see a comma and a that. What's happening over here? How is this suddenly correct? Abhishek, I'm not sure what you're trying to say. If you want, you can unmute.
So here a Ferrari describes a car. So
Hmm.
it is between a pair of commas. It is
Very good.
not a single comma.
Very good. So this is not a single comma, this is a pair of commas. So going back to our punctuation class, you may remember that we discussed sometimes you may see non-essential modifiers, right? That day we did not discuss what a non-essential modifier is, but now we know what a non-essential modifier is. A non-essential modifier is one that does not serve to identify the thing that you're talking about. When that happens, when you get a non-essential modifier between a pair of commas, the pair of commas is for the non-essential modifier. So if you look at this a Ferrari thing, right, and you want to take it out of the sentence, you need to take its pair of commas also out. So this is actually saying a car that crashed into the wall without a comma between car and that. The only reason you are seeing a comma is that you need a pair of commas for the Ferrari phrase. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? Manu, feel free to unmute and ask your doubt. Okay, excellent. All right. Now let's head to the left-hand side where we've got participles. Now, participles are obviously very important for your GMAT exam. Let's just get going. So basically, there are two types of participles: present participles and past participles. There is also a way to sort of combine these two into something called a perfect participle. But let's hold off on that. Let's do the two main types first, which is the present and past. Now, the first thing to know about the present participle is that it will always take the ing form. So let's put that down over here. ing, always. But when you see an ing, you cannot immediately say that you're looking at a present participle. So an ing can be a lot of things. So remember, the relationship is like this. All present participles are ings, but not all ings are present participles. In other words, present participles are a subset of ing. Quick check, is everyone comfortable visualizing it like this? Present participles are a subset of ing. So ings have other uses. Yeah, they can be other things. They can be other things, not just present participles. But all present participles are definitely ing. Manu and Rahul, quick check. Are we comfortable visualizing it like this? Excellent. Okay, so let's look at all the different things that an ing can be. So remember, now we're talking about ings. We're not talking about present participles yet. So right now, we're just looking at all the possibilities when it comes to an ing. Like when you see an ing, what are the different things that you could be looking at? The first one is you may be looking at a preposition. This is not something that happens very often, right? Because these are just specific words. Some prepositions end in ing, that's it. So whether you see a question with this or not, it's totally up in the air. Anyway, so words like including and according to, these are prepositions. We don't treat them as participles. So an ing may be a preposition, but don't worry too much about this category, right? If you want, you can remember like a couple of examples of preposition phrases that act as take the ing form. But otherwise, don't worry too much about this. Deprioritize it. Let's come to the important part. An ing is almost certainly either a noun or a gerund or a present participle. Let's take examples. Take a look at that first, the painting by M.F. Hussain, that example. A painting by M.F. Hussain sold for $2.5 million in late 2020. Now that ing, a painting, it is firstly, it is coming after a, right? So we know that that's the noun test, a and the. So that is a word that is a noun. And another way to think about this is an object, right? It's a physical object. So that is definitely going to be a noun, a painting. Now, if you look at the second one, painting the walls again. Painting the walls again is a gerund. It's not really a noun. It's an ing that is acting as a noun. So again, what is a gerund? It's an ing that acts as a noun but implies an action. So painting the walls again is not the solution. Actually, let me ask you guys, what is the subject of that sentence, the painting the wall sentence?
It's painting the walls again.
Right. The whole thing. Painting the walls again. The whole thing is the subject. And remember, the subject is always something that's a noun or something that's acting as a noun, right? In our classes, we've called these things noun or noun-like elements. A gerund is a noun-like element. Now, the way you test whether your ing is acting as a noun or not is to replace that entire ing phrase with it. So let's try that. It is not the solution. And remember, I will stress this again. You need to replace the entire phrase with it. You can't just replace the gerund. So you can't just say it the walls again is not the solution. This is not correct. You need to take the entire phrase out and replace it with it. It is not the solution. That sounds okay, and that gives you a big clue that you're looking at a noun or a gerund. So this is how you test whether an ing is a noun or a gerund. Take the entire noun or gerund phrase out, replace it with it. If it works, then yes, it is a noun or a gerund. But if taking that phrase out and replacing it with it doesn't work, then you're almost certainly not looking at a noun or a gerund. Now, the second category is very easy. We've come across this many, many times. An ing, that is a present participle, can be part of a verb. And the way we've been studying this from our earliest sessions is if your ing is preceded by a helping verb, then the combination is a verb, but neither of those alone is a complete verb. So, helping verb plus present participle, the whole thing is called a verb. Let's take a quick example. He is playing chess. He is playing chess. Is playing is the verb, where is a helping verb and playing is a present participle. So let's quickly write that out. Is playing. Is playing is a verb and it's made up of a helping verb and a present participle. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? Ankit and Manu, quick check. Excellent. Now, when we use an ing verb, right, after certain conjunctions, you may not see a complete clause. Now, we've already discussed this. You may or may not remember it, but let's take another example. I think the last time we discussed it was with although. So we said that, hey, if with although you're starting the sentence and you're describing the noun, then within the although you can understand away the noun and verb, right? The subject and verb. That's exactly what we're going to take a look at. We'll use a different example. I think that time we were solving an official question. Right now, let's just take a short example. And this time we're going to take an example with while. So the sentence over here is, while you are driving a car, you must never use messaging apps. So while you are driving, while is a subordinating conjunction. After the subordinating conjunction, you have a subject and verb. You are driving, but you don't need to have the subject plus verb over there. You can just have the participle. So you can say, while driving a car, you must never use messaging apps. So this is also absolutely okay. This sort of ellipsis is absolutely fine. So you can understand away the subject and verb, and you can just say the sentence without the subject and verb in the dependent clause. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this also?
Sir, here that rule
Mhm.
applies, right, which we discussed with the although, that if that while driving a car part comes later in the sentence, it'll need a subject.
Exactly. So over here also, maybe I should have pointed this out. The you part applies to driving also, right? Now you can understand away the subject and verb. So you're absolutely right. I can't say something like while driving a car, comma, the passenger must check whether the driver is using messaging apps. So while driving a car must necessarily be followed by the person or thing that is driving the car. So yeah, absolutely correct. So the same thing that we discussed for although applies here as well. Now, excellent. Let me give you one more example. This is from an actual GMAT. Okay, let me not give you the actual GMAT question. Let me give you something similar to what they used. Mm, so the word they used is since. Let me just come up with something else. Since, yeah, since leaving college, comma, he has started an NGO. Nothing major over here. I just want to check. Does the sentence sound okay? Just put a yes if it sounds okay. Otherwise, just put a no. Since leaving college, he has started an NGO. Got it. Manu saying it sounds weird. Abhishek and Ankit is saying it sounds okay. Rahul is saying it sounds weird. Fair enough. Then, yeah, we need to remember that this can happen, right? Or let me ask you a different question. No, hang on. I'd already asked you whether you're comfortable with using it with while, right? So, for example, if I say, while leaving college, he decided to visit his friends, right? I think you'd be comfortable saying that. Um, what we're doing over here is the same thing that we are doing over there, except that we're doing it with a different word. We are using the word since instead of the word while. So, or although, right? So I think although and while, you guys are comfortable with those examples. All we're saying is it can be done with since also. And this is why we should be aware of this, because as I said, this example, since plus ing, is from an actual GMAT question. But anyway, so the point over here is since can also be used in the same way that we use although and while. Quick check, Manu and Rahul, better? Excellent. So, some of these things we just need to memorize, because if we see them, right, and they don't sound good, there's a very high probability that we're just going to remove that option. That is exactly what we've been discussing in our classes. Don't go entirely by sound, and of course, prepare for as many structures as you can. All right. Now, the next one. A present participle, as we discussed, a present participle is basically two things. Either it can be part of a verb or it can be a modifier. That's it. So, okay, let me clarify. An ing can be more things, right? An ing can be a preposition, it can be a noun or a gerund, it can be a present participle. But when you've got a present participle can be only two things. It can be part of a verb or it can be a modifier. Now, let's take some examples. The first one is sometimes, a little confusing for some students. I want you to read this sentence, the we spent sentence. And when you're ready, I want you to tell me what it means. Just the meaning of the sentence. Feel free to unmute and let me know.
So it means we spent.
Manu, go ahead. I heard Manu first.
It means that we spent the whole day painting the house.
Right. That is, you spent the whole day performing the activity of painting the house, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. The only thing I wanted to check over here is sometimes people say that this painting is wrong because it's modifying day, that it's telling you which day you spent.
No,
That's
it's modifying house actually.
no, it's modifying spent. It's
Spent.
telling you
Okay.
how you spent the day,
Okay.
right? But fair enough. The meaning that you gave is correct, and that's what I want to confirm. Is everyone comfortable reading it the way Manu read it? We spent the entire day painting the house means we spent the whole day performing the activity of painting the house. That is how we spent the day, not which day did we spend. Quick check. Okay, Rahul's confirmed,
Yes, sir.
Ankit's confirmed, and Abhishek's confirmed. Perfect. All right.
Sir,
Now let's go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. Sir,
No, no.
sir, in the present participle, that it can act as a verb. That
No, no, no. A present participle cannot act as a verb.
no, as part of a verb, as part of a
Mhm,
verb.
mhm, mhm.
So in these above, some conjunctions are written after, although, before it, since, though, well, when, and while, right? So
Mhm.
if like in although and in all these all these parts, like for example, if we say though, so if so in a sentence, if though comes after a clause, right, not before a clause. If we have a full clause, then though after, and then though comes after that clause, so it should be followed by subject and verb, or it can be followed by a participle.
Subject and verb, please.
Okay. So it
right?
is
So that is, yeah, that is specific to although and though.
okay. So with
So hmm?
all these
No,
seven
no, no,
spec
no, 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 no,
okay,
not all of them. Just although and though.
although and though. Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, just imagine I say something like, always lock the door while leaving your house,
Always. Yeah. Okay.
right? Or I say something like, he has achieved many things since leaving college, right? So,
Mm.
that discussion that we had, that you can only do it when it starts, that was only for although. Okay,
Although and though. Right. Okay.
correct. All right. Now let's come to the one where a participle describes a noun. These are called reduced relative clauses. What does reduced mean? Just means shortened. So it's relatively easy. Just take a look at the first one. The people who are painting our house are professionals. So the people who are painting our house, you can make it shorter by just saying the people painting our house are professionals. I'm guessing this sounds okay because most of us are very used to doing this. And in fact, I remember that one of you asked this question also in one of our earlier sessions. Just give me a yes. Let me confirm everyone's okay. Rahul's comfortable. Manu, Ankit, Abhishek. Perfect. All right. Now the last one, right? The last one is the one that is, um, I mean, you would have also seen that this is the one that is of the most importance for us. This is an introductory adverb. Okay, let me take a step back. I have called it an adverbial, right? But many people refer to it as an adjective, which is fine. I have no problem with that. What you call it does not matter, but you need to be able to identify it. So let's take a look at this example. Using her phone camera, comma. Now you know what has to happen over here. You need the logical noun to be the subject of this clause. So, for example, the journalist, the young journalist. Now, over here, if we are not sure, then what do? We go step by step. We take this entire thing, we try replacing it with it. So, remember what is it was for? It was for checking whether that thing you're looking at, that ing you're looking at, is a noun or a gerund or not. So, you take that whole thing, replace it with it. It, comma, the young journalist. Doesn't make sense. So, the using over here is not a noun or a gerund. The second step, check whether it's part of a verb. Okay, here there is no helping verb. In fact, there is nothing before the using. So this is clearly not part of a verb. So it's not part of a verb either. This means it must be a modifier. And if it starts off before your clause, then after the clause, you absolutely need to make sure. Sorry, not after the clause, after the comma. Sorry. So after the comma, the subject of the clause needs to be a logical noun that makes sense with this modifier. So using her phone camera, comma, the young journalist. So when do we apply this? We don't apply this when you've got an ing that is a noun or a gerund. We don't apply this when you've got an ing that is part of a verb. We apply this when your ing is part of a modifier, when it is the modifier, and it comes before your clause. We'll discuss what happens when it comes in the like the subsequent position after the comma. So you have a clause, and after the comma, you have the ing. We'll discuss that in our next session. But right now, I just want to quickly check. Are we comfortable saying this? Introductory ing modifier, participle, present participle modifier needs to be followed by the logical noun. Manu's comfortable, Rahul's comfortable, Ankit and Abhi. Perfect. I expect that you guys would have seen this because this is tested relatively often on the GMAT. So if you've solved any number of GMAT questions, you would have definitely come across this at least a few times by now. Now, yeah, one last thing about present participles. Present participles are active in meaning. So keep this in mind. We'll discuss why this is important later on. But just remember this: present participles are active in meaning. All right, now let's come to the last part of the discussion, which is past participles. First of all, past participles don't have a consistent form. So remember, we discussed that all present participles are ing forms, even though not all ings are present participles. Past participles are not that consistent. So they usually take that ed form, but there's no guarantee that a past participle will take the ed form. But let's hold on to that. Let's take a look at these ed forms. So remember, right now we're not discussing past participles, we are discussing ed forms. Ed forms can be two things. Ed forms can be verbs or they can be past participles. Take a look at this sentence: they played a game of tennis. Now, the subject over here is they, the verb is played. So, played is a verb. Let's mark it out. And how do you know that it's a verb? One way to check whether it's a verb or not is to ask yourself, does this thing sound complete? Does it sound like a sentence? They played a game of tennis. Sounds like a sentence. So it must have a subject and verb. Played is a verb over here. Also in brackets, I'll just write down active voice. Now let's take a look at the next example. They have played a game of tennis. Now let me ask you guys, what is the verb in the next sentence? They have played a game of tennis. Okay, I've got a couple of answers. Abhishek and Manu are both saying have played. Very good. Have played is the verb. Now, whenever your ed comes with a helping verb, right, then it is not a verb on its own. Because, as we discussed, the combination will be the verb. Right? So the combination of the helping verb and the ed will be the actual verb. But neither the helping verb nor the ed will be a complete verb on its own. The bottom line is that when your ed comes with a helping verb, that ed is a past participle. Always. It is never a verb on its own. Now, what does this mean? It means that even though your ed looks like a verb in the second sentence, it is nothing like the first ed. So, what was the first ed? The first ed was a verb. They played a game of tennis. But the second ed is not a verb, even though it looks like a verb. It is a past participle. So, the bottom line, if your ed is coming with a helping verb, there is no chance that your ed is a verb. It has to be a past participle. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? Excellent. Now, take a look at the third sentence. A game of tennis was played by them. Again, the verb is was played. What is again happening? Your played is occurring with a helping verb. So, again, whenever you have a helping verb, it doesn't matter what helping verb you have. Whenever you have a helping verb, the ed will never be a verb on its own. So, that ed is also a past participle. It is not a verb. Which brings us to past participle modifiers. Now, you notice I've written passive over here, right? A game of tennis was played by them. Now, when you are in that passive meaning and you drop all the helping verbs, then you are left with a past participle modifier. A game of tennis was played by them. Was played is a complete verb, passive. And if you are in the passive and you drop all the helping verbs, like you can drop was over here, you will end up with a past participle modifier. Let me read that phrase. A game of tennis played by them. Now, the first thing you'll notice is this does not sound like a complete sentence. A game of tennis played by them. Right? That's why whenever we are in the passive meaning, why am I saying passive? Because the game of tennis received the action of playing. It did not perform the action of playing. The game did not play anything. The game received the playing. But I don't have a helping verb. I'm not saying a game of tennis was played. So if I don't have a helping verb, this is not a complete verb. Played is a participle. Some of you may have also figured that out by saying, oh, played by them is describing the game, right? It's telling you which game we're talking about. So, a game of tennis played by them. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? All right, perfect. Now, that is the important point when it comes to these ED forms. Sometimes the GMAT will put you in situations where you have to figure out what that ED is doing in the sentence. Like, what is it? That is the only way to solve certain questions. Okay, now let's take a look at the example over here. So I will be asking you guys to come up with your own examples. But first, let's take our hang on. So this example is actually the same thing as the previous one, right? So you need to make sure that the subject makes sense. So the first sentence says, outmaneuvered by its smaller, nimbler competitors, the tech giant. So who is outmaneuvered? Logically speaking, it must be the tech giant who is outmaneuvered. We don't want to say outmaneuvered, comma, the strategy, the tech giant's new strategy. The strategy was not outmaneuvered. The company was outmaneuvered. So the second one is wrong. The first one is correct. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? All right. Good to see that you're comfortable with this, because now I will ask you to come up with examples on your own. So, what is your task? You have to come up with an ED. Okay, let's say you can use other forms also. I don't mind. But most likely you'll end up using an ED. You have to make two sentences. One sentence in which your ED is the main verb, and a second sentence in which your ED is a modifier. Now, you can use that modifier wherever you want. Use your imagination, use it in different places. It's totally up to you. But the point is, two sentences with an ED. The first one uses the ED as a main verb. The second one uses the ED as a modifier. Some of you may have to experiment a little bit with your EDs, because not all EDs can go into the passive meaning. But that doesn't matter. Go ahead, take a minute or so, and I'll let you know when 1 minute is over, and then I'll ask all of you for your examples. So please make sure you have two sentences ready. Please go ahead. Okay, I see that Abhishek is done. Abhishek, would you like to lead this discussion, please?
Sir, I found a book.
Good. Example
Here
of?
found is a verb.
Very good.
And sir, the book found by me was torn.
Good.
Here found is describing the book, and my verb is was, and found is past participle.
Good. So if you want to use it just as a past participle modifier, you'll say the book found by me. Perfect. Rahul, would you like to continue?
Yes, sir. So he asked a lot of doubts in his class,
Mm-hmm.
and the main like another example with the helping verb will be he was asked to give examples to support his answer.
Hmm.
So here the asked is coming with a helping verb and is a past participle.
Right. And do you also have an example for a past participle modifier?
So in the first one, he asked a lot of doubts in his class.
Hmm.
It's not that. So am I using it wrong?
Say that again. Your voice broke.
He asked a lot of doubts in
Hmm.
class.
Yeah, yeah. What is your question?
So is this not a modifier, a verb, a modifier?
Oh, no, no, no. Asked is a verb.
Okay.
So remember, you can ask yourself, does the sentence sound complete or not? So, for example, if you say, he asked many doubts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It sounds like a complete sentence, no?
Okay.
And there's one more way to do this. You can ask yourself, am I in the active voice or the passive voice? Right? So
This
the
is active
thing,
voice.
absolutely. So the thing about present and past participle modifiers is that present participles are basically active in meaning, and past participle modifiers are basically passive in meaning. So I mean,
Okay.
there are some exceptions, but they are very few. So we don't even bother discussing the exceptions. So if you say I asked many doubts, right, or he asked many doubts, you are in the active voice.
Hmm.
So your ed will almost certainly not be a modifier because past participle modifiers are almost always passive in meaning.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Ankit, would you like to continue?
Hello.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Ankit.
When ed is working as a verb, we can say like that he walked carefully on the mountains.
Hmm.
And when it is working as an modifier, then we can say threatened by predator, fish vanished in water.
That is correct. So in the first one, walked is a verb because he is doing the walking. In the second one, threatened is a modifier because something is getting threatened. We are in the passive sense. Good. Manu?
So I came up with two. First is he played a lot of games,
Hmm.
where played is the active verb, and then
Hmm.
in the past participle sentence, it was outplayed by his competitor. Nadal lost the Grand Slam.
Perfect. That is absolutely correct. So again, you've got that passive sense that he was outplayed, right? But you've dropped the helping verb, you've ended up with the past participle modifier. That is absolutely correct. All right. So, good job, guys. I think we've got a good handle on participles, recognizing participles, differentiating between participles and actual verbs, right? So, all of this stuff is important. We've also finished a little earlier than I expected, but that's fine. So, rather than overloading ourselves with everything within modifiers in one session, I think let's just take one session slightly lighter than usual, and let's head immediately into our practice questions. So today we'll not be taking that break. Instead, we'll just be having a quick discussion on the remaining 5 questions. So let's open those up, and then you'll be able to, you'll get free from your session a little earlier than normal. Please go ahead.